Friends, we continue on a journey today, the journey through the Gospel of Matthew, which we started last week. As we are reading our way through the synoptic Gospels, that means the ones that can be viewed together, those Gospels that can be viewed side by side, and they follow the same general format. That's Mark, Matthew, and when I get back from sabbatical, we'll start on Luke. But here we are on our second stage in Matthew. And we get some amazing stories, some wonderful stories, some awesome stories, some stories of baptism here. I have to tell you, when I knew Alina wanted to get baptized, and I was looking at the calendar and I saw the Sunday it could happen on, I just thought, this is a God thing. The Spirit is clearly moving here that this text lined up with this event. And what a joyous occasion it was. What a joyous occasion it is to acknowledge, to witness that experience, and to share that message once again. That we are each and all beloved. It happens before one dips into the water, if one ever dips into the water. This is always the case. Lena knew this. We talked about baptism before. She knew God was already with her always. But it is a sign. And it is a sign here in our gospel as Matthew, or whatever his name was, but we'll call him Matthew for ease, as Matthew shares this story in his particular setting. So we already have gone through Jesus' genealogy, remember, back in chapter 1. We have gone through his birth, his having to flee to Egypt and then to go out of Egypt, and then he comes out of the waters and is identified as God's child, God's beloved. Seems like things are going pretty well here for Jesus. But then immediately, right after his identity is named, right after he is proclaimed a son of God, a child of the Most High, the Spirit casts him into the wilderness. Things got a little rougher for Jesus. And we are told, according to our story, that he fasted for 40 days. And he encountered tests, temptations. And Matthew is not like Mark, whom he was probably reading and whose story he was likely following. Matthew doesn't just leave it at that. Matthew paints a picture for us. Matthew tells us these are the things that tempted Jesus. These are the trials he experienced. This is what he went through before he began his public ministry. And we are invited to remember, to hold in mind what Matthew's intentions may have been by sharing these particular stories. Again, Mark didn't include them. Is that because Mark didn't know? Mark didn't have a videographer following Jesus around in the desert, whereas Matthew did? But then Luke had a different videographer, but a different editor, perhaps, so then reordered a couple of those temptations? Friends, clearly our author here is trying to tell us something about who Jesus is, who this earliest community experienced Jesus to be. And we talked last Sunday. About how that the birth, the dreams, the fleeing to Egypt, the coming out of Egypt was one of Matthew's ways of paralleling Jesus and another great prophet. You remember the guy's name? Starts with an M. Yeah, Moses. Jesus being a greater Moses. And the story continues, right? Because Moses left Egypt. And how? How did Moses and the people of Israel, God's chosen people, how did they leave Egypt? But through the parting of the waters of the Red Sea, right? And what did we just have? We had a baptism. We had water. Jesus got water, and the skies opened up. So maybe Matthew is continuing this connection to Moses, this connection to the Israelites, to his predecessors, as we read in the genealogy at the beginning of Matthew's story. And what happened after the people were free? What happened after they went through that sea? Were they immediately basking in the sun and just eating fresh fruits and drinking beautiful clean water and sipping on wine? No, they were not. They wandered around the wilderness for a while. How many years? 40 years. Reminiscent, perhaps, of the 40 days, or perhaps the 40 days is reminiscent of the 40 years. A connection, once again, is being made here, right? This one is a following, a continuation of what has gone before. And God's liberating history, of God's liberating work with God's people. That's going on again here with Jesus. But while the people are in the wilderness, those 40 years, they get hungry as well. They grumble. They start complaining. And God responds and gives them some manna, and even gives them some quail, right? And then they continue on and they start grumbling again. They want clean water. Who would have thought? And they have Moses, God invites Moses to strike a rock, and water bursts forth. And this is where the problem comes for Moses. You know, he didn't get to the promised land, right? You know, the reason given was because he tested God. This is that test, right here in the wilderness, at the rock with the water. And then there was another temptation, another challenge the people of Israel experienced when Moses went off and was up on a mountain doing something like getting 10 commandments. And the people got antsy. The people got anxious. And they said, Aaron, brother of Moses, make us some gods. This is the golden calf story that perhaps you are familiar with. These stories connect with the stories that are offered here in Matthew. Jesus' responses to Satan, to the devil, to evil incarnate, remind the people of these instances and highlight how Jesus remained faithful to the divine. Jesus continued to heed God's word, to follow God's guidance. He wouldn't worship anyone else. He wouldn't use his newfound identity, because people thought, we have these stories even about Jesus multiplying loaves and fishes. Could he have turned a stone into a loaf? People back then could have said, well, yeah, anything seems possible. Look what he did with the loaves and the fish. But he doesn't do that. And he doesn't throw himself down. So again, Matthew here is trying to tell us something, trying to show us something, to help us to understand who Jesus is. He continues along the line of Moses and the people of God, the Israelites. But what do we do with that? We just witnessed, we just experienced this tremendous moment of baptism, this embrace of a child who said, I want to follow in the way of Jesus. I want to follow in the way of God. And we proclaim that way to be a way of justice, to be the way of peace and of love. And we don't do that just because we want to, but because we live by every word that flows from the mouth of God, and not just any God. This is the God who led the people out of oppression and exploitation and subjugation under Egypt. This is a God of liberation. Jesus commits to following this God of freedom, this God of justice, this God of peace, and will not succumb to the temptations that are all around him, that are all around us. I'm sure you all could name for yourselves some of those temptations that you experience, that you encounter, that try to pull you, that try to get your deepest trust, your loyalty, your allegiance, your ultimate allegiance, to give it to something else that is not God, that is not liberation, that is not love, that is not justice. Today, I consider, though, what is one of those temptations for us as a congregation, as a community of faith. And of course, I'm thinking about the coffee hour that's going to be happening in a few moments, and what we're going to be discussing there. And I've engaged in this conversation with colleagues as well. One of our temptations, I think, is to focus solely on charitable works. Charitable works being those that you can see, like giving somebody a loaf of bread, right? Bringing somebody some cereal, and what we offer for Pathways, right? We gather food every month to give that to the families at Pathways. We gather milk every week to give to the families at Pathways because they indeed need something to eat. They deserve something to eat. Yes, they do. And we can count that. We can see that. We can understand that. We can feel good about that. We did something. We know how many families we fed. We know how many pounds of food or hygiene items we gave. We know how much money we collected and donated. But I think we are called to more. Not that that is not needed. Clearly it is. Clearly, when people are hungering, we need to give them food. When they are thirsty, we need to give them clean water to drink, okay? Don't hear me discounting charitable works because we need it. And that's the key piece here. And we are called and invited to be engaged in the work of justice. And justice is harder. And justice takes a lot longer. And justice doesn't have those victories, those wins, those numbers for us. But they result, those acts, that work, that trudging through the muck and the mire, that work creates fewer mouths to feed, fewer bellies to fill, fewer folks cast on the side of the road. That is work we are called to, the work of justice, that long haul work, to listen, to attend to follow, to nourish ourselves on every word that flows from the mouth of God. Not just any God, remember? Not some God we create in our mind, not some God up in some fluffy clouds with rainbows and puppy dogs and lollipops and whatever other kind of treats you like. The God of liberation. That's what God is about. That's what Jesus is about. Matthew is painting a picture for us today. This, friends, is who he is. And if we seek to follow him, following Jesus, doing justice, building community, if we seek to follow Jesus, we are invited to go on this arduous, long path. And like Moses, we might not get to the promised land. Like Jesus, we might not see God's realm fully realized in this world. Like Martin Luther King Jr., we might not see his dream realized. But we are still called to that work. And Jesus gives us some hints, some keys, or Matthew's Jesus gives us some nuggets to hold on to remember who we are and whose we are, to remember that we are not alone, that we did not start this work. It began long before us, and we are continuing that work. We are invited to join in the flow of that work, to have it push us forward, just as Jesus here is shown quoting Moses, whom folks traditionally think wrote Deuteronomy. Those are the verses Jesus is quoting. To call on our ancestors when they were at their very best, to heed God's call, even in the midst of trial and tribulation. To attend to the life of Jesus. That's what we're doing here together, right? That's what we're seeking to do on this journey through the Gospels. So friends, I invite you to continue that discernment and to continue it together, because one of the things I can't fail to notice is that right after Jesus was all by himself in Matthew's Gospel, he starts calling others to do it with him. He learns, he's smart enough, he's wise enough to know he can't go it alone. We have partners, accountability partners, supporters, cheerleaders, others who are seeking to do this work as well. So friends, let us call on each other. Let us call on our ancestors. Let us open ourselves and remember who we are and whose we are. You are God's beloved. Now let us go and let us live like Jesus lived. Let us go and let us face those challenges and those temptations, that together we might move the needle toward a more just realm, toward realizing God's beautiful, just vision for us and for this world. Friends, that's what I've been thinking about, some of what I've been thinking about throughout the course of this week. I invite you to take a moment to consider how the Spirit is moving within you, how God is inviting you to join on this path toward following Jesus. As we encounter Jesus in the wilderness, just following his baptism. Friends, let us be together now for a moment of reflection and meditation, a moment of prayer. Let us be together now for a moment of pause.